Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Samita. I'm the regional coordinator for Men Engage South Asia, speaking from Sri Lanka. Welcome to all of you who have joined with us today for this exciting roundtable discussion that we are going to have. I think for today's roundtable, I think we have a very very distinguished speakers who have been working on this subject matter for a long time, and we are quite excited to listen to them today. As you all know, this is the third roundtable for South Asia that we are hosting for the Ubuntu Men Engage Alliance Symposium, which we actually launched in November 2020. And since November up to now, there had been a lot of engagement, lot of discussions, and a lot of engagements, a lot of discussions going on with the symposium thematic areas. And for South Asia also, I think we have been organizing few roundtables, and we have participated in some cross-regional roundtables, and also we have had some experience sharing sessions on some of the work that we do as South Asia. So it's quite, we are quite happy to host this roundtable discussion today. With the engagement of people who have been with us for a long time and working with us on the subject of masculinities for a long time. So it's we are quite excited to listen to this round of discussion. So welcome all of you. I will not take much time. For today's discussion, we have selected the topic masculinities, languages, and South Asian nationalisms. And I think when you see the topic and when you hear the topic, you might already know the relevance of the topic for South Asia, because we are in a kind of a era where we need to talk about how masculinity is our own cultures, our own languages, and our own South Asian backgrounds, South Asian way of learning had kind of impacted on developing or establishing a kind of a South Asian nationalisms, which of course can be for certain people look like it's more convenient, more beneficial, and for some people not so much. So I think it's better to just put the topic out there and see how from different countries perspective, from different cultures perspective, and as commonly as South Asia, how we are going to look at this whole concept. So I think I will just hand over to my moderator for today. Let me introduce her. Um, so, the session moderator for today is Ms. Bilkish Tahira. Actually, she had been the earlier regional coordinator for Men Engage South Asia from her organization Shirakat Partnership for Development. Ms. Bilkish Tahira is a feminist activist and had been part of women's movement and human rights movement in Pakistan for over 3 decades. And she has extensive experience in working on women's concern nationally and internationally, including violence against women, GBV, peace, conflict, and issues related to education, protection of child labor and child protection, and of course, engaging men and boys for gender equality and women's empowerment. And many policy concerns regarding these areas that I have just mentioned. Currently, she is the executive director for Shirakat Partnership for Development, a national NGO working on human rights and gender justice in Pakistan. And she is also the national coordinator for Men Engage Pakistan. So, Bilkish, welcome to the session, and I will hand over from here. Please take from this point onwards. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Samita, and welcome everyone to all participants. I know that there's so much, looking at the names, I know that there's so much experience around the room, and that's why we would like eventually to have more time for discussion. I would urge all of you to please introduce yourselves in the chat, because as in the virtual space, there usually isn't enough time for everyone to introduce themselves. So please do that. And our people will be who are, really active behind, arrangement of this very interesting, promises to be informative and a deep dive into all these, language, ideas, etc. And I'll, make myself brief. But anyway, as we know that language is a real mode of communication for all of us, but at the same time, it also creates and reinforces, perpetuates our identities and the ideas that we, live through. And all our lives, our reference is a reference point is to those messages that we received that, generated different ideas, had us follow some concepts, etc. So this is a very, very, as Samita said, exciting, but also, we'll share our knowledge. So I'll just go through quickly. What are the objectives of this session? The first one is to really share knowledge, our experiences on the role and influence of language communication in the construction of masculinities, and also masculine hegemonic impressions of masculinities in South Asia, then exploring how language, literature, and culture have constructed, legitimized, and promoted hegemonic forms of masculinity, and also creating a knowledge forum to discuss South Asia's way forward in promoting inclusive, peaceful, and tolerant communities. Before I go ahead, may I request people who are not speaking to mute themselves for the moment, because otherwise, it takes away from the quality of our communication. Sorry. This is the new mode of communication. So, thank you very much, everyone, for being here. And the first session is on how have communications through literature and culture impacted masculinities. And each speaker will be talking about their own, countries, their socio-economic and political history. And the first one that I'm proud to introduce is Sanil Vanyarashi from Sri Lanka. I mean, Sanil is, can we have the, oh yes, wonderful. Sanil is co-founder and director of Hashtag Generation, which is an organization led by a group of young tech-savvy Sri Lankans working towards building a society where everyone has the skills, information, and tools to be an active participant in making decisions that affect their communities, technologies, and bodies. In 2017, he received the Queen's Young Leader Award in recognition of his work on using social and new media tools to empower young people to meaningfully engage in decision-making processes. He has an MSc in Human Rights from London School of Economics and Political Science, where he went on achieving scholarship. I can promise you a very, very interesting presentation, because I just looked at first slide and it was very motivating and, an eye opener. Sunil, you have the floor now. Over to you.
Thank you, Bilkis, for that very kind introduction. I hope my presentation can live up to what you just described. Samita as well, thank you for this invitation as well, and for bringing together this very important group together to discuss something very important, and I think something we don't talk enough about as well. So in my presentation, what I hope to do is a few things. I thought I'll talk a little bit about pre-colonial Sri Lanka in particular, but I hope some of it also resonates with our colleagues from other parts of South Asia. And some observations about our understandings of masculinity and femininity have also changed over time, especially as a result of the colonial project. And then I thought I'd think a little bit also about the current context in our country, in Sri Lanka, and how some of these types of masculinity and nationalism are also kind of building off each other in different ways, particularly in kind of anti-minority sentiments, especially against the Muslim minority in the post-war, post-conflict context. I don't really have a lot of slides, but I have a few quotations and images, just like 2 or 3 slides that I thought I will share as well. I mean, I guess just to open, I think our understandings of masculinity and femininity, I think we all probably agree that have changed over time, right? In different parts of history, in different places, what it means to be masculine and what it means to be feminine have also changed over time. And I think particularly after the colonial project, this has also changed quite substantially because it was quite substantially influenced by the colonial project. And particular understandings of masculinity and femininity, which are quite inspired by the European versions of masculinity and femininity, were kind of imposed on the colonies. So just to show this, I have a few quotes here. Some of it are from kind of just 2 quotes and 1 image from the kind of the colonial archives. This one is from someone called Raymond Douglas from the 1920s, and this is how kind of these white colonial rulers looked at some of the brown men, and this is particularly in the Sri Lankan context. So kind of having colonized the country, a lot of the white rulers felt that the Sri Lankan male was not masculine enough. And this is kind of what some of the things in the colonial archive and so on demonstrate, that they constantly understood the Sri Lankan male who had kind of longer hair and so on, and some of them wore bangles and earrings and so on, even kind of people in leadership positions like generals and kings and so on. So they were constantly understood as not masculine enough. And because they were not masculine enough, then they were possibly not worthy and capable of holding leadership positions. And the examples of this kind of thing is there in the colonial archive. I also want to highlight that kind of by bringing out examples from this pre-colonial world doesn't mean that kind of everything was perfect before colonialism and kind of our countries were like a feminist utopia before colonialism. But I think this is helpful to understand that that colonialism impacted our countries in quite important ways. Because before colonialism, as we know, there were like hierarchies like caste and kingship, and of course there was war and violence and so on. But I think specific things also changed because of the colonial project. So I think quotes like this are helpful for us to understand this. And I think one thing also to remember is that, of course, we are also looking at these things through the eyes of the colonial ruler, which means that we are looking at it through their own kind of orientalist, exoticizing language. So those are just things to be mindful of. But I think it's still helpful to look at these things just to get a sense of what they thought our masculinity was like. Then there is this other quote as well by a German biologist. This is the second and the last quote that I wanted to share. He again constantly refers to the Sri Lankan male as, because of the long hair and the oiled hair, as curiously feminine. And because of kind of it refers to the slender, fragile proportions and so on. So the colonized kind of brown male is constantly seen as not masculine enough. And this is not something specific to Sri Lanka. If you look at a lot of the archives from Africa, Latin America, and so on, a lot of the rulers were not seen as masculine as the white male, according to the white male standard. So one thing that has been understood by kind of post-colonial thinkers and so on is that then in the fight for self-determination and the fight for independence, the colonial male constantly had to prove that they were masculine enough to then obtain leadership. And that was kind of an expectation that people that a lot of the ruling class, the male ruling class, felt that they need to aspire towards. Now, this I think has reflected in some harmful ways today, especially in the context of nationalism. Um, my last slide is of a few kings from kind of the pre-colonial time, and I think the way they're dressed today would definitely be now. And in this context, these were kings who were holding positions of leadership, right? They were leading armies and they were running countries. But today, but they're wearing kind of bangles, earrings, necklaces, and things like that, floral designs, and so on. Things that in today's context would be understood as effeminate, possibly even queer, right? But in that context, it was possibly considered masculine and worthy of leadership and so on. So I think looking at images like this is helpful to understand how these things have changed over time. Because what often happens is we encounter so on like this in our day-to-day lives at the temples, at historical sites, and so on. But we don't really think about how this what it says about how colonialism impacted our everyday lives, about our dress senses, about the way we act, and so on. So that's those are kind of just a few examples. Now, a few questions I think which are worth asking are also when we constantly refer, especially within nationalist discourse, when we constantly refer to our proud heritage and proud culture. When we constantly talk about, for example, in the Sri Lankan context, we refer to a 2,500-year-old proud culture and heritage. I think it's worth posing questions like, then are we also willing to reclaim these parts of our heritage? Are we also willing to reclaim a context where so are we also willing to reclaim a heritage in which kind of men were wearing bangles and earrings and performing masculinity in ways different to what we understand today? Because when we talk about history, and history is completely used in nationalist discourse, we talk about reclaiming specific parts of our history. And often there are parts of our history that are used to legitimize treating women differently. So the way women should dress, for example, in the Sri Lankan context, the fact that the woman should necessarily wear a sari to go into government office and so on, is something that is imposed on women. But on the flip side, the men often have that option of either wearing the kind of Western attire and very less likely of wearing kind of the Sri Lankan traditional dress, which is also a lot more kind of in today's language, a lot more respectable than what we see those kings wearing as well. So I think one question, especially for people kind of interested in these questions and people who are interested in challenging these things like nationalism and patriarchy and so on, I think it's worth asking questions like that. I think today, particularly in the context of nationalist discourse, we also see appeals to kind of masculine leadership, right? We are saying we need a strong leader who can protect our country, who can protect us, because the country is constantly seen as under threat from outside forces, like from other countries, but also from inside, especially from minority communities. And therefore, we need a strong leader to protect us. And that concept also refers to language around the home as well, like the home needs a father who can protect the home. Constantly in language, we refer to a country which also then needs someone to protect the country, especially from people who can kind of protect harmful interference. Okay. Yeah. So I think that's important, and I think especially in the current context, that kind of thing can easily also also end up going into kind of anti-minority sentiments, which we have seen, because then those types of leaders who are kind of called to be strong leaders and kind of tough leaders and masculine and kind of macho leaders are then not people that we look at to be empathetic, right? To be kind leaders, to be empathetic leaders, to be leaders who will listen to different communities and engage with them. So I think that has a direct impact on governance and policy as well. So I think these are also not just kind of conceptual things that are interesting to think about, but have a daily impact on kind of everyday life, everyday political economy as well, and so on. I mean, even if you think about kind of parliament, currently in Sri Lanka, it's about 5%. So I think that also is impacted by, for instance, the types of masculinity that we spoke about. I know my time is just, I think, possibly over. And I know Dr. Sepal is also planning to cover some of these aspects. So I will leave out questions about kind of anti-Muslim attacks in Sri Lanka in the recent past and so on. But I think my final point is that as people who are interested in these questions, and the people who are interested in challenging these questions, I think we shouldn't see things like patriarchy, homophobia, and nationalism, and so on, as separate challenges, which is often what happens in the type of work that we do. We challenge each of them separately, but I think that kind of thing is dangerous and harmful. In that, when we challenge one thing, it can easily support groups that are interested in furthering the other thing. For instance, anti-minority, anti-Muslim discourse in Sri Lanka often has language that goes around kind of protecting the Muslim woman from this really conservative climate and so on. And that kind of language is extremely harmful because, and also, in a lot of sense, untrue as well. So I think when we engage in this type of work, we should challenge all of these different articulations of power equally, and not kind of focus on one type of thing, which can actually, in some ways, even though our intention is not so, work harmfully in a lot of ways as well. Yeah, so that is basically the points that I wanted to make, and I hope some of you found it interesting. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Great, Sunil. Wonderful. Such fantastic ideas. I mean, I can't even begin to, sum up the ideas that you have presented. Excellent historical, tracing of this, of a highly political field. So I will now invite Dr. Sepali Kotegode to present her ideas. She'll extend Sunil's points of discussion and, fill any other gaps, and she will reflect on Sinhala chauvinistic nationalism and incidents of social violence. And also she'll look at the rhetoric that emerges out of such incidents to reveal how ethno-religious identities are pushed out. Dr. Kotegode is, an sorry. Dr. Kotegode, let me get the, more information on that. Can we have, is an academic, a women's rights activist, and she has done a lot of work, DPhil, MPhil in development studies from the Institute of Development Studies, Sussex, which was actually one of the first two. One was ISS and the other was IDS. institutes to look at women's development, gender and development, academic issues. She's a visiting lecturer in gender women's studies at the Faculty of Graduate Studies, University of Colombo, Sri Lanka. Her research includes women in the informal sectors, women's unpaid care work, migrant workers, SRHR, gender and disasters, women in the media and politics. So many areas of research. She's director of programs at the Women in Media Collective. Dr. Sepali, Dr. Kote Kote, over to you. And you have about 7 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you
Welcome.
very much. Thank you, Bilkis, and thank you, the Men Engage Alliance, for inviting me to make share my thoughts on this issue. So, to pick up from something Senil said about the construction of it's not a construction of masculinity in the sense the social acceptance of the image of masculinity pre-colonial, and we can go back to the 19th and 18th centuries, and the physical appearance of men. Today we see it mostly, as Senel showed, in paintings and statues of kings or royalty that existed at the time. But long hair, jewelry, necklaces, earrings, and all that. And the change post-colonial to the short-haired and trimmed beards or no beards male. Now, it's also interesting that given that we are, 70, 80 years since independence, in the last decade and a half or so, or maybe 2 decades, there is a growing tendency in Sri Lanka also for young males. It began with the urban males, but it's also now more visible in the non-urban areas, of young men with their long hair and with a bracelet or with the pierced ears, which in Sri Lanka was considered quite an outrageous thing 20 years ago. But it's back, it has come in, it's kind of become more socially accepted at a certain level. So there is, I think, also maybe an expansion of masculinity, but it is primarily among the younger male men that this experimentation is going on, because among the older generation, except for those in the rural areas and those who might be engaged in paddy cultivation or something, this is not the common trend. I also want to also bring that up, again coming from Senel's the descriptions he presented of how the European looked at the Sri Lankan or probably the South Asian man as being, beautiful skin and effeminate. I remember when we began discussing at a more political level sexual orientation and gender identity. I recall that in the 1980s, where in Sri Lanka and I think in South Asia, men holding hands is not an uncommon thing. We can put it on a scale of whether it's what is now technically defined as homosexual or not. But men holding hands is normal. It's normal in our societies. I think but for the non-South Asian, it immediately they would categorize it in terms of a homosexual relationship. And here I use the word homosexual as defined in the much more clinical kind of sense. So there again, the social interactions between and among men and their sexuality, I think, was also something that was very much part of our cultures, but not part of the cultures of the European who came over to our countries as colonizers. The other issue I want to raise is, I think when we talk about nationalisms and masculinity, I think that the relationship is also quite clear particularly I mean, it's clear, and I think we can see it in terms of maybe our own, the kind of textbooks that are used I would say in government schools, in the government education system, because Sri Lanka, the widest outreach of education is through the government. But also in terms, but these become highlighted in at times of social or political crises, and that's what Stella referred to towards the end. Now, when we have majority sentiment and a majority ideology and a majority sense of power, and in Sri Lanka it would be the Sinhalese and the Sinhala Buddhists, and then we have the designated minorities, which would be in Sri Lanka the Tamils, whether they are Tamil Hindus or Tamil Christians, and the what we technically call Muslims, but who are also Malays and Moors, who migrated to Sri Lanka, or who were part of Sri Lankan culture and history for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. So then when these political crises come, the masculinities and the nationalism sentiments become kind of merged, because the conversation or the articulation becomes one where it highlights or glorifies the majority maleness and looks at the minority, most often the minority female, the women, because the relationship is always that the men have more power and must control, must be the persons who make decisions, and the women are the ones who have to toe the line, are the bearers of culture, the ones who pass on the next generation. So during the time, and this was a study Women and Media Collective did some years ago, very strong post-war, our war, internal war, the ethnic war ended technically in 2009. Post that, huge spate of print media and social media on the minority and the minority women, which was primarily the Muslim women. And the kind of language that was used, and this was a study we did on the Facebook exchanges in social media, and I know Sinel didn't have time, but they also monitored this. Now, things like the language used was, Sri Lanka is an unfortunate country. This is in the print media, in a Sinhala mainstream newspaper. Because Sri Lanka is an unfortunate country, because the worst minorities in the world are found in Sri Lanka. The Muslim population is growing rapidly. According to the Islam religion, both birth control is prohibited. Sinhalese are a race who like to produce 1 or 2 children and like a simple and entertaining life. Another one, today our race is facing a big danger among the Sinhalese. There are only 1 million within childbearing age. Most do not realize that this is a grave challenge we are facing. Today, women only think about their figure. Sticking to those views will lead to the reduction of the nation. If the family health worker comes to educate about family planning, chase her away. Today, we are not demising naturally. If mothers prefer, they could produce children and hand them over to the Buddhist dispensation. This was a very radical Sinhala chauvinist Buddhist clergy group that also had lay followers. So, to me, these nationalisms do manifest very strongly in terms of and the masculinities at times of political, social upheavals. And the other area, I think, is again we are still in a post-war period. I don't know how long it will go on till, but okay, 1 minute more, time up, I'm told. But I just want to say one more thing. In the current scenario that we have, what we also see is it's not even creeping, the militarization of civil administration. And when we say militarization, the image of that masculine figure, and most, I think the majority are, or rather, let's put it this way, there are very, very small representation of minority communities in the military in this country. So this is another manifestation, I think, of the nationalisms and masculinities. So my time is up, and I'll stop. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Kodigode. I really, enjoyed it so much. I mean, we could talk and talk and talk, except that, in the interest of time, we have to move forward now. And the next person who I have the honor to introduce is Professor Madhu Kushwaha, who will speak on the role of textbooks and how it has become a blueprint of state ideology, how it defines nationalism and masculinity vis-a-vis feminism. And she will be talking about pedagogical practices in school culture, analysis at the state level and central level, and also how are these messages received and perceived by the learners, language and knowledge construction, and around, South Asian masculinities. Dr. Madhu Kushwaha is also an academic, and she is working at Banaras Hindu University. She's a professor there, has been a Fulbright, visiting scholar. She has a master's degree in sociology and PhD in education, and her area of specialization includes sociology of education and gender issues in education. She has developed various courses for undergrad, postgrad students. Her research focuses on documentation of gender discrimination in teachers' classroom practices in Indian social context, with the purpose to improve teacher education practices. Currently, she is working on developing and standardizing a self-instructional model on menstrual education for Indian adolescents girls. I mean, really, such an important task. Several publications in leading national and international journals of education and gender studies. She has authored 2 books on gender issues in education, has completed 4 research projects, including 1 international one on construction of nationality and masculinity, role of textbooks, inset teachers, effect of home and school language gap, and impact of incentive schemes on primary education in India. Very actively involved with several non-governmental organizations working in education and gender equality. Over to you, Professor Madhu Kushwaha. It's my honor to, have you here, and looking forward to listening to you avidly. You have 14 minutes. Over to you, Dr. Madhu.
Thank you, Bilkis, for the kind introduction, and good afternoon to all of you who are here. It's really encouraging to you people to have on this platform and to share my research, which I conducted. So first of all, I did a study. It's a little bit old, but it is not out of context, as I did it in 2012. And it is a textbook analysis of Samita, can you enable me to share my screen, as it says that you have disabled participant screen sharing? Samita?
Yes, now you can.
Okay, thank you. So it's basically it's a textbook analysis, but the background is I'm really interested in learning that how students learn about the nationalistic demand which is imposed on them, and the same time is a masculinity thing, because nationalism, as you all know, that is the masculine project, and it it is a kind of nationalism as is a we feeling kind of thing, and it requires, it's not a one-time project, you know, and it requires constant interpretation and constant repetition. So the the nationalist project needs constant repetition, and it requires constant communication with the future generation, so that the message regarding a particular kind of masculinity and nationalism goes on. So any exercise which requires repetition, like it's a very favored condition in terms of school, because school within school we have students of impressionable age, and we can repeat the exercise and the messages uh, year over the year, like 10 years or 12 years of schooling. So within schooling, how this message is embroidered, and the all the practices, as said, Bilkis said, that we can talk about pedagogical practices, we can talk about school culture, but here I'll talk about the textbooks, because textbooks are uh, the shared blueprint of societal expectations, and the nationalistic aspirations are reflected through textbooks. And textbooks are a kind of solid, is a solid evidence where the state and the future generation, the interaction of the future with future generation, the state and future generation interaction can be seen, because what kind of expectations are shared through textbooks. And particularly states have immense interest in education in order to control the whole discourse of nationalism and the masculinity. So from that backdrop, the study I undertook. And as you know that in modern nation states, school is the only legitimizing agency of knowledge. So all learning must be validated uh, and certified by a school. And within school, we not only, children just, they do not learn only uh, school subjects like language, numeracy, and science, etc. They also learn about the masculinity and femininity. What are the expectations, and what does it mean to be a man and woman in a particular cultural context or societal context. So that is and with this I had 2 or 3 questions in my mind, like what kind of messages regarding masculinities are there in terms of the like other hierarchies, caste, class, and religion, and how this twin messages of masculinity and nationalisms are interwoven and presented. And is there any difference in terms of the textbooks, in terms of messages which are followed at the national level and the regional level? Because as you know that in India, all the states can have their own set of textbooks. So I'll be focusing on particularly the second research question due to paucity of time, because I cannot deal all the questions in detail. Uh, I followed this discourse analysis in social constructivist framework. Some of the students were also interviewed at the end of study. If there is time, I will share this finding. I selected 3 sets of textbooks. One is which is currently being in use. Second was which is not in use but is the previous curriculum framework set of textbooks, and the third which is followed in a North Indian state, Uttar Pradesh. It's a very popular state, one of the most popular state of India. So, and here there is a little bit like caution. I just want to say that set 1 textbooks are the same as being today, with certain omission, certain deletions. Because when this textbook was commissioned, there was a different government, and now from 2014 there is a change of government. So after coming into government, this dispensation has deleted certain portions. Major overhaul of the textbooks we are expecting in coming years, because now they have bought a new education policy. So as of now, set 1 textbooks are there with certain chapters are deleted. Set 2 textbooks, as I said, that's the old one, so no changes there. I have selected these 6 textbooks from archival sources from library. Set 3 textbooks, there is no change in set 3 textbooks. They are the same. This is basically just an indication of the relative weightage of the number of chapters. Within chapters, there are no kind of neat thematic categorization, like one chapter is based on a particular theme and other chapter was on a particular theme. It is just to show you the relative weightage of the kind of these themes, as you can see in the left column: war heroes, militant nationalism, patriotism, women in nationalist project, so kind of thing. So you can see the relative weightage. Set 1 textbooks have the least overt messages regarding militant nationalism and the masculinity. Set 2 and Set 3 textbooks have very overt, very explicit, and crude messages were there. Themes which most dominant themes which were, like, after the analysis, it was found that they were the war and war heroes, militant nationalism, gendered account of nation, and patriotism, positive masculinity. I'll discuss with some brief excerpts of the textbooks and side by side my analysis. Though we live in like 21st century, but it seems that textbooks love to depict war, and there were several numerous references of war, either between gods and demons, among kings, between native king and Muslim invaders, between Indian independent struggle against British, some violent, aggressive masculinist. In India, there was a two kind of approaches towards freedom movement, like a very aggressive masculinist, which resorted to violence, another one which was the Gandhian in nature, like non-violence, etc. So the second set of textbooks, there was a more reference of those violent struggle between independent during the independence movement, because war, as I analyzed the textbooks, I found that war and warlike situation, it was a favored trope to teach students about bravery, to teach students about patriotism. And because in the conflicting situation, the traditional masculine ideals can be highlighted, can be explained to students, and the textbooks writers and the makers, they believe that they can inspire students through these war heroes. So they found a very prominent place in the textbooks. Set 2 and Set 3 textbooks extensively depicted war heroes prominently. Set 1, like, there was a less depiction of war heroes. And all the three set of textbooks had a poem on Queen who showed manly quality of bravery and sacrificed her life. So she was depicted as a brave patriot person, but her quality was described as a manly and mardani kind of thing. She was referred, and all the three sets had this. She's a very prominent figure. Second thing which I want to mention, second point, is the militant nationalism. Masculinity and nationalism both were presented as one and the same. As I said that, because the microculture of everyday masculinity and nationalism, it articulates well with the demand of nationalism, because both require the protection from enemy. Masculinity at individual level, men are supposed to be the protector of the family, protector of their kids and the clan. And then in nationalism, men are supposed to be the protector of the mother nation, and the nation is always presented as a female figure, or as a mother, as an embodied women, nation as embodied as a women. So basically, the honor, the patriotism, the cowardice, bravery, and duty, these attributes were assigned to masculine ideals or masculinity, but these are very hard to distinguish, that all these terms are equally applicable to the nationalist discourse also. Like, we talk about brave soldiers, patriotic soldiers, and there were the traitors, those who were the cowardice kind of thing. So it's a way, it seems to it's really difficult to distinguish between what are the masculine ideals and what are the nationalist ideals. At the surface level, it seems within the textbooks, the sample textbook which I analyzed, at surface level, it seems that the women are absent from the nationalist project. And it seems that the nationalism is for men, of the men, by the men project. But if you dig deep, you will find the portrayal of women in two sections, negative and positive. When they are positive portrayal of women, they are either found representation as a symbolic mother or mother nation, or actual mothers of brave, virile, patriotic sons. When women were portrayed negative, they were portrayed selfish, impulsive, submissive. And most of the time when textbooks contain the folklores or older folklores in the textbooks. So those were the instances. As you can see that when women found reference as a mother of the patriotic and virile sons, these are the excerpts of two chapters. One is from Bhagat Singh, Shahid Bhagat Singh, a very well-known renowned freedom fighter, and who sacrificed his life. And the other one is again is an excerpt of his autobiography of he wrote a letter to his mother, and both of them are expressing their mothers, their desire to sacrifice their life, and the kind of promise they have made to the nation. When the war and the warlike situation are not there in the textbooks, masculinity is portrayed as bravery is a staple diet of masculine ideal, you know, as I say that, because contempt for weakness was shown, and even in metaphor, like some poems use metaphor, and those metaphors were used for contempt of weakness, like a death of cowardice and a death of retreat is a kind of shame. And if you die with bravery, you will be termed as a martyr in your, and you will be remembered. And so those are the, and please remember, these are the class 6 textbooks, and the kids are only 11, 12 years, or maybe 13 years old. So why these highest ideals are placed for such young adolescent men or boys, like because within nationalist discourse, we produce men out of boys. And children are very central. As I analyze the textbooks, I mean, children are very central to the nationalist project, because most of the time they are addressed as an adult. Because sometimes when I interviewed kids after this, some of the texts which demanded high moral of sacrifice for nation and patriotism, some of the texts were beyond their grasp at that level. So it seems that though we have attained independence, like 70 years have passed, but still we are obsessed with this whole nationalist idea and the enemy of the nation. And so for that we need protection, and for protection we need soldiers, and for that kids are the best person to influence them, and the masculinity finds bravery as a something which, if you, bravery minus masculinity is like zero masculinity, the way they produce this kind of thing. As I said, that the textbooks have a very hegemonic form of masculinity, which supports the upper caste and upper class and ruling class masculinity. In one of the textbooks, which was a set 2 textbook, Hindi textbook, it raised the issue of caste in Indian context, because this chapter was focused on Guru Gobind Singh, the ninth and the last Sikh Guru, and he was asking sacrifice from people, and he was asking head, and he was recruiting the soldiers person to fight against the rulers of that time. So 2 persons came forward to to do the ultimate sacrifice. And as you can see, the asserts that they were from the lower caste, and they said that, and they asked Guru, will you accept our head, our sacrifice? So in spite of doing this, the entire chapter focused on the Guru Gobind Singh, and it never ever discussed the issue of like the caste inequality and the discrimination. I say that why I say saying that the feminization of lower caste, because the men of the lower caste and class, they were feminized the same way like women were devoid of agency, and they were presented vulnerable before the upper caste men, or before the men. The same treatment was done with the lower caste men, because they were devoid of any agency. Even though they want to sacrifice, they have the highest masculine ideal, but they are still skeptical that whether their sacrifice will be accepted by the leaders of that discourse or not. So masculinity is not about all men. It is nationalist, like hegemonic masculinity within nationalism. Like nationalism is for certain hegemonic class. Males have the right to define what nationalism is and what nationalistic demands are. So those are the very ironical situation within the textbooks, because it not only naturalizes the hegemonic masculinity and nationalism, it also naturalizes the caste discrimination, because lower caste men or lower class men are not they are not entitled the same manner the way the other hegemonic men are rulers were there, and the same manner a ruling class female, like as I mentioned, Rani of Jhansi, she was masculinized because being women from upper caste women, she fought battle against Britishers, and she presented the highest bravery. Yeah. So sliders, my time is up. So with this was the last slide. I can share my thoughts when I interviewed students. So explicit messages regarding aggressive and militaristic masculinity was there. And the Hindi, moral science, and history textbooks were preferred for these kind of messages in comparison to English. So thank you for your attention. I'll continue in the next session, next round. Sorry.
Thank you, Professor Saiba. It's lovely to hear, because it so resonates with our childhood, the messages that we heard when we went to school, and children spend so much time in school, perhaps more than they spend time with their parents, and it's so impressionistic. Thank you so much. And, we'll keep hearing from you in the next dialogue session as well. Now I'm really pleased to introduce Dr. Syed Imran Haider from Pakistan. He will be speaking on, how masculine nationalism has been created in history with examples from South Asia, how these have evolved with a focus on the role of media and the role played by media institutions, how history is constructed, legends are created, and the ways in which they define nationalism, and then ideas on way forward. Where do we go from here? Dr. Imran Haider is an academic with over 15 years of experience of teaching, research, program analysis, and capacity building. He has a PhD in sociology with life skill-based education and is an internationally certified expert on gender transformative approaches. He has developed several training, curricula, and BCC materials on different issues of gender. He has been part of Men Engage Alliance for over 2 decades, for about 12 to 13 years, and has worked with a number of NGOs as well, national and international NGOs as well. Dr. Haider It's my, extreme pleasure and honor to invite you to speak. And, over to you now. You have about 13 to 14 minutes. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Bilkis Tahira, and all the organizers of this event. First of all, I would like to thank you all for providing me with this opportunity. And before I start, I was wondering when Professor Madhu was presenting her research study. So actually, she was speaking my heart out, and she was mentioning all those things which I was thinking to mention in my presentation or in my piece of statement for which I am here. So what I can do now is that I'll try not to be more academic and try to make things more understandable and general for the general public. So, because all the presenters were quite enlightening, and I'll try not to repeat things. So, with this start, first thing which I would like to mention is like when Professor Madhu was mentioning different ways how that hegemonic nationalism is being developed and how it is being put into the academic curricula. The most important thing is that how to keep all these things relevant on different times, because such kind of nationalism needs a permanence, or it needs a repetitive, you can say, a latent phase, that how to keep these things relevant and alive. So for that, the basic thing which is very interesting when we analyze the masculine nationalism in South Asian countries, that is a permanent, maybe perceived or maybe real, a perception of some enemy, that you have threat from others. Maybe at national level, if there is some regional nationalism or some ethnic nationalism, because being a sociologist and anthropologist, we don't only see nationalism on the basis of a state identity. It can also be on the basis of your ethnic identity, your language identity, or maybe sometimes your religious or sectarian identity. So, to keep all these masculine definitions and characteristics of nationalism alive, we always need a sort of enemy around us. And with that, we also need to present to our younger generation that you are a superior identity. You know, the ethnocentric things, that you are, if not ideal, but you are one of the best identities. You are the best religion, or you have the best culture. Like for South Asian countries, like your family system is the best in the world. It it is not like the European or the Western countries where the perceived or the presented way of family system in our countries. So if you have that best or ideal culture which identifies and defines your gender values, your masculine characteristics, how a woman should be, right from family up to the national level, then on the other hand, if it is at threat of some enemy, and I'll not name any enemy in this discussion, because I know and you all know the sensitivity around those all enemies, which are maybe either on the basis of your religious identity or your state identity or your nationalism. So these perception of enemies, now it is obligation, it is responsibility of every individual to get socialized in a way, to prepare him or herself in a way, or his family or his surrounding and his state, that you are the savior or protector of your nationalism. And with this, like how it is being constructed, it is very well defined through an analysis of the academic curricula by my previous presenter. I'll just try to add a few things. Like in history, when I analyze the history of South Asian countries in their textbooks or in their predominantly present books and literature related to history, what is being presented there? One thing, war and wars and wars. In like in South Asia, the war between maybe Muslims and the locals when Muhammad bin Qasim came in, and the wars between Pakistan and India, maybe the wars between gods in the ancient history, and these. In addition to these wars, what is presented in these wars? The warriors. Who are the heroes? Heroes are only the warriors, and the warriors, those warriors which were victorious. Yeah. And if you're not victorious in that specific war, that's not your responsibility. That's responsibility of others who maybe did something negative or did bad things to overcome your culture or your resources. And on the other end, if not warriors, then what is in your history? Second thing is the rulers, the ruling regimes, the kings, the presidents, prime ministers. If we try to find out the common masses, the common movements, or the human rights related things in our history, so our major content is missing all those things. So with this presentation of history, you create legends. Legends are always masculine. If one of the example presented by her is the Rani of Jhansi, but we have many others. Even in the Pakistan, in Bangladesh, if the rulers, if any successful woman is there, we present them like masculine characters. The characters who were more powerful, who won their position through their power, whether physical, whether power of wealth, or any sort of political power. So the legends are always highly masculine, mostly with physical power as well as with other forms of power. So if my kids, maybe girls or boys, if they're getting those legends in their textbook, in their media, in their films, I don't want to name many films from India and Pakistan, especially which I know, and which were some of my part of my content analysis in some previous research studies. So these sort of legends are being presented to us. And if I want to get myself well respected, well settled, and well accepted in my all the settings, I need to follow all of those norms. So through this, like, and it's not only with regards to our recent political history, in religions, in all the religious history, the most dominantly presented legends are either rulers or warriors. My whole presentation will surround between these two words because our whole masculine nationalism in the textbook, in the media, in the history books, in our literature, in our verbal arts, which is generally one of the mediums to express love, but that is also being influenced by these kind of social constructions. And then when we talk about further the today's media, well, uh, it's quite there are a lot of examples when I see different songs related to national love, related to patriotism. Mostly what is being shown into those songs, yeah, the armies, the military men, the persons in uniform with gun, maybe with fighting jet. uh, I wish I could see equally the people who are also working for the construction of these countries in a softer way. Our gardeners uh, are very important. They are trying to protect our environment, and that is also a very important thing. Our general, those all people who are maybe struggling in hospitals for the healthcare, who are providing education to the kids, uh, those are not that much presented into those songs of patriotism. As well as in the movies, uh, we hardly can find movies and dramas which are presented with the idea of patriotism and nationalism, and in those movies, some little or less masculine. I'm not talking about that very soft and with the expression of love and friendship, but mostly even that friend, if that friendship is being presented, that is also presented as an honor that a masculine authority person in the name of friendship is somehow compromising and sacrificing for human beings. So these things, yeah, I'll definitely finish within my given time. Yeah. So then media, religion, history, and my next part was curricula, the textbook. But I'm skipping that. That is very well defined and explained by the professor Madhu. But my last point is very important. That when you have a perception of a permanent enemy and a permanent threat, when these kinds of legends are present, then you develop lenses within your own selves. Then you're not asked to adopt those masculine norms. Then those masculine norms becomes definitions of appropriateness within your own self. And when you try to logically evaluate things, your logic becomes biased. Your logic becomes more nationalist. Your logic becomes more sort of violent with power, and you have to fight for your right. So that fight for right comes with violence. And this thing creates those lenses further strong. Here at the end, I just want to give a very simple example that once one of my friend, when I had a friend from another country with another religion, when he was coming to meet me, a friend of mine, a childhood friend, he was sitting with me. He said, "Shall I sit here? I want to meet him," because I never had a friend of that religion and from that specific country. I said, "Yes, please sit." And when that person met me, we spent 1.5 hour together. And when that person left, you know what my friend said to me? "Imran, he is just like me. He is just like us. I have just lost and I have just wasted my 2 hours. I was thinking that he will be some sort of different person, how we see that specific religion people in our TV or in our books. But that is just like us. He was talking like us. His interest were just what we discussed on daily basis with each of us. So with that, just one liner way forward, that is this example, the communication, the hegemonic nationalism, the enemy based nationalistic ideologies always try us to not to interact openly with each other, and the only way forward is communication, is interaction. When that interaction is being made, some of, not all, some of these legends get questioned, and that is where the journey starts. I hope, I'm sorry for not being too academic, because I intentionally then switched on to the general discussion to put some questions in front of you, or food for thought. I hope I'm within time. So thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to your questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Imran. Such, practical ideas and examples and experience sharing. I really, really appreciate that, and I'm sure the participants do as well. I will now open the session for everyone to come in, and, you can make comments, you can ask questions. The process will be, we'll take 3 questions at a time and then refer them to the panelists to speak. I had seen, you can also, if you click on participants, you will find a space which says, you can put your hand up also, but please feel free to come in as well. So over to the participants now. It's your time. Please go ahead. Introduce yourself briefly, say your name and organization, and then ask the question, please. Okay, Sagar Sahib has his hand up. Please go ahead.
Hello, thank you so much for these lovely presentations. I'm Sagar from the YP Foundation. We work in India on young people's leaderships and rights. My one clarification I was seeking from Professor Madhu Kushwaha on that great presentation and the research is on the term positive masculinity. So, in general, in developmental work, how we see positive masculinities is as ideals that men can aspire to, which are more peaceful, which are less violent, and so on. But it seemed that in your research, this term was defined a little differently based on the implications that you were talking about. So it would just be nice to hear what exactly was the definition of the word positive in masculinities in your research. And just also would like to actually read this research more. So if you could also share if this is accessible to the public and where one can find more insights of this research. Thank you.
Thank you, Sagar. Can we have two more questions before we refer to panelists, please? While people are thinking, I'll read out two questions from the chat where Safi Khan has said, how do we analyze cracks in popular masculinity models to enter the transformative process? What are the most effective ways of transformation to begin, if there are any lessons from different regions? And the third question is, at what age we find the transformation process take a natural path to begin? So we have four questions now. Over to the panelists, please. Yes, Professor Madhu, you wanted to add something.
So I'll begin with Mr. Sagar's question, and then I'll take one of the question from which you read in chat, Safi's question maybe. For my research, the positive masculinity was exactly it when the masculinity was not, or the men were not presented in a very violent situation, that I did not operationally define any term before doing the discourse analysis. So I found that most of the time men were presented, or masculinity or masculine ideals were presented in a conflicting situation, like fighting with enemy. Real enemy or hypothetical enemy or mythological enemy, maybe. So, and in those conflicting situations, there is always the question of protecting women folk, or protecting family, or protecting the honor of the nation, so on and so forth. So that was presented before men as a something very something, and as an ideal to aspire for. So what I'm saying, that aggression is bred and cultivated in boys from very young age. However, the textbooks seems to legitimize and justify the use of violence in the name of protection of honor of nation, class, family, or women. So most of the time when these men they are not fighting in a public place for the nation or something like that. So violence, the kind of violence which are being perpetrated by them, most of the time men have the kind of justification because they are doing it for the protection of the honor of the family, or honor of their family name or something like that. So those were the instances which I found most of the time men and masculinity were presented, because in the poem where the metaphor was used, this poem was not about any war or something like that. A bird was used, but the poem is in Hindi, so I can know that it is a male bird because the way the language and pronouns were used. So the poem says to a 11 or 12-year-old child that do not retreat. There is a clear-cut contempt for the cowardice. Like, even your wings are battered, you should not come back, because the friends and family will laugh on you, and you should go on martyrdom. Just fight and go for the sacrifice, because then the history will remember you. So that kind of ideals which are being presented before men, it is something, it's not natural order for being a man, because it is against the compassionate idea of men having compassion, men having weakness, very natural weakness of a child or of a person. So all of us have weakness, those kind of things. So these are the very highest kind of ideals, because in the textbooks, nothing negative masculinity kind of thing is there. Exactly, everything is portrayed as a positive masculinity. So whatever I termed as a positive masculinity in my research, it is like that bravery and something which is devoid of any weakness or any trace of weakness or human weakness, so very rare instances we found in textbooks where men were or boys were presented in that. I hope I answered your question. And something about the link, yes, I can provide the link where this whole entire research is published. So I'll share the link where you can access the research journal to Samita, and then Samita can share it with everybody.
Thank you very much. Professor Imran wanted to come in.
Yeah, actually, I just wanted to add, like the question was asked with regards to any practical example of how transformation can take place. So my take is that the question is very simple to ask, but its answer is quite complex. That this transformation needs to first understand the whole process of its formation, and then you have to interfere or influence or involve that formation process, in which family as a basic agent of socialization is involved, educational institution is involved, your state politics is involved. So its answer cannot be very easy, but in general, yeah, the first thing which you need, that we have to welcome questions from our kids, that creative thinking, because the most difficult thing to initiate in this discourse of change is to welcome the critical thinking, because that critical thinking is being intentionally not, you can say, appreciated. So that can be explained if I will get more time. So in one line, it's just critical thinking in your educational and socialization process.
Thank you so much, Professor Imran. Does any of the other panelists want to come in? Okay. Sanil, you wanted to say something. Please go ahead.
Sure, yeah. Just to add to what Professor said as well, I think it is a complex question and it links to all of the different aspects of our life. So there aren't easy answers. But I think one thing that can help is role models, especially role models in kind of the public sphere, which has influence over people. Because I think there are role models who are pushing these limits, then it gives permission for other young people also to look at them and aspire to be like, okay, there are other ways of being a man, and then that also gives them permission to kind of push those limits more. So I think that's one thing that could be important, and this could be in a kind of really public sense, like celebrities and so on. But I think in our everyday life, wherever we have we are in positions of power, whether it's in our family or in our office. If you can make those environments more open, then I think by just doing that, you don't maybe need to speak up more, but then it gives other people the impression that, okay, if he's doing it, then maybe all of us can do it as well. And it's not easy, but I think the more you try to push those limits, then I think the more we give other people permission to do it as well.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, because I have a little bit insight about this, like the transformation thing. So one of the way of doing the thing is that teacher education, which I have experimented, because I teach a course on gender and education, and I am in a teacher education program. So whenever we involve like the teaching, because at as an individual teacher, you do not have much say in like how the curriculum or the textbooks are going to be written or in that way. But we can educate teachers to involve students, as Professor Imran said, that the critical thinking. So the kind of question you ask while teaching, I'll share the example of the same research in which I talked to students, and both of the male students, I talked to male students and one female student. Both of the male students, they said that yeah, it is very important to be patriot because it is important to protect our nation, and it's we have to fight for the honor of the nation. So I said, okay, so who can be patriot? I asked them the question. It's a kind of series of small question and answer. They said that anyone can be patriots. Okay, so then what does it mean? It means the student said that it is mean fighting for nation. So I said, can women fight for the nation? They said no. So they said, how can they be patriot then? So I don't know. So I said that, do you think that the women are not patriot? So those were the moment of doubt was there, and after like 2 or 3 minutes, the same boy came to me and said that women can be patriot by helping male soldiers. I said, but they cannot be patriot in the same manner the way. He said, I have to think. And so then what do you think about Rani Lakshmi Bai? Because the poem you liked in your textbook, was she a woman or not? So those were the questions which led to the thinking. But it involves a very careful teacher training, and through teacher education, that critical thinking and that like a kind of shift in your thinking, in a shift in the thinking of the kids can be done. But the problem is that when you upscale it, that is the problem. Like you can do it with the 20-25 students, as I did with my my students teachers, those who go and teach in the school. But I don't know how to, because the at mass level you have to change the entire textbooks, the way you write it. So those were the recommendations that we always put forward, and you and I both know that the political agenda, we cannot leave aside the political agenda of education. So we are at the mercy of the political dispensation, like what kind of textbooks are going to be in the hand of the students. So those are the limitation of doing it as I understand, doing it at a mass level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sipali. Would you like to come in now?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, I'll just refer to the question on transformation. One of the ways in which we have been trying to counter the masculinity social norms is we've started a program on recognizing unpaid care work. And in that, we have been making small video clips, maybe 1 minute, 2 minutes, around what we are focusing at this point around festivals celebrated by the different ethnic and religious communities in Sri Lanka. So, for example, for Diwali, we had the The mother is a nurse. She's involved with COVID work. She's not in the home. But the father does all the preparations of the food, the traditional food, and relates a story of Diwali, but makes the monster, the terror is COVID. Then for Ramazan, we had where, the husband and wife, and the husband came in. And so we also have been getting good responses to these videos when we have launched them. So that's one thing. I think it has to be a very coherent, consistent messaging through what is known as not too much alternative, but within the established means, such as these video clips. It has to go through, I think, to educational institutions, to the general public, different levels. The transformation has to be at different levels. So that's just one thing. But also this question on, it's not very clear on WID, because I think the question was, is this the failure of many women in development projects that led to the realization of targeting women? I'm not very clear whether it is a failure and the negative masculinity. Would Shamsha, would you like to come in and just clarify what the question is? Because in my view, the women in development did target the women, and that in itself had a lot of issues. I mean, even if we look at the way in which loans are given out for the microfinance, I think this is a bane of South Asia for me, because it has just pulled so many thousands and thousands of women right under. But the targeting is, women are good because they are responsible. They will pay back. They will make sure, and they put all these things. And then the men are kept out. Why? Because the men are not reliable. They don't pay back. They will go and drink with it. So the whole process of that development framework was actually upholding masculinity and, I would say, irresponsibility and unreliability, whereas the woman was held up as if, and the women ended up actually many thousands ended up just drowning under it. So that's how I understand. That's from my understanding of what women in development programs did, and the shortfall there. But if it was projected to take away the social norms of masculinity, if development programs themselves actually bring in the men in a different context, not as we have been discussing today, as the protector and the decision maker and the person who apparently earns the main income. I think there has to be counter messaging and counter interventions within development projects to make sure that we bring some kind of equality in thinking of women and men in the heteronormative way, we thinking of in women and men, and the way in which, as the development frameworks are made, the way in which the men and women contribute to development of a country. So if Shamsha can tell me whether I have addressed this question or not, I can come back.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other questions? And then Shamsher can also, explain the question that he had. Sanjeev, I see that you want to say something. You will have to unmute yourself. I don't see any hands up. So Shamsher, can you come in and explain what you meant by your question?
Hi everyone, this is Shamsher. Simply my question, I mean by my question that the low number of women involved in the development industry, and the number of projects which related to the development of women is very low. So that's why I think that the problem arise from there. We should make it clear, and we should make it possible to increase the number of women in development projects, and this will help us in understanding the idea of masculinity and the positive and negative.
Sorry, we lost you, Shamsher. I cannot hear Shamsher. Does anyone? Is it different with anyone else?
No, can't hear him.
Yeah, I also lost him. Are there any other questions, or shall we move forward? I'm inviting all participants. Please unmute and speak. You don't even have to put your hand up. Well, it does seem that there are no further questions or comments or experience sharing from the participants. Does anyone want to come in? This is the last call. Otherwise, we move the next section of our presentations. Okay, so I understand from the silence that there are no further questions. So I would now request all the speakers, panelists, to take 2 minutes each. If you want to address, any issue that, came up or you thought of, or any other impression. Well, Shamsher is saying the connection is very poor. That's why he, got disconnected. But anyway, over to Dr. Sipali for your last minute comments or thinking. You have 2 to 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. I think the discussion on that Professor Madhu presented on the textbooks, I think that's really interesting. I was involved in looking at English language secondary school textbooks way, gosh, I think 1980 or something, and it's very true. So I'm not sure. I haven't done the work recently, but I think from what Professor Madhu presented, it's really interesting because the masculinity, the power, and the masculine image and the message goes through each government that comes into power thinks that they are going to be producing better textbooks for children. So they become really guinea pigs. So I don't know how we had one really good education policy that was again about 50 years ago, absolutely wonderful. But then governments changed and that went away. So how we make interventions at the level of mainstream government education, I think, we need to think and strategize on how to make such kind of interventions that will stay. Who are the heroes and the heroines and what? And I think also using social media to counter the message of masculinity and power and nationalism. So yes, things are being done, but I think anyway, South Asia, our countries are uneven in our access to internet, and as we can see, in access to consistently okay internet as well. But it's an area which I think we can make good, solid interventions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sunil, do you want to go ahead?
Sure, yes. So I think this is a really interesting discussion. I think as it also shows that as South Asia, we have so much in common in terms of challenges as well. Of course, there are differences in context, but I think the challenges that are facing us are in some ways very similar. So I think one thing I thought about also is one thing that I actually wanted to share earlier but didn't in the interests of time is also just about how some of these messages are reflected online today. And I just have three lines here. These are from some of the social media posts that kind of were there in the Sri Lankan context after the Easter Sunday bombings. And as you can see, there's kind of complete, there's nationalism and racism, which is completely linked to discourse around masculinity. And I think this is, I think this is the point that was there throughout as well by the other speakers, that I think we can't see these as separate challenges, kind of issues around masculinity and femininity, around gender and sexuality, and also around racism and nationalism. I think they're linked. I think what a lot of these statements are saying is also questions around if you aren't racist and nationalist, then you're also not masculine enough. And in some ways, if you're promoting peace and coexistence, then you're not a masculine man, because masculine men don't talk about peace and coexistence. And I think we need to challenge that, and then say, you know what, you can still be you can be a man and talk about peace and coexistence between communities. And I think the way to do that is, like I said earlier, through role models as well, because then when more people see other people doing it, then it gives other people also permission to be the same way. And I think we need a change, of course, in the broader structures like the education system and all of these things, which are extremely difficult and will take us a long time. But I think in the meantime, we need role models that young people can look up to. And I think one final point I think is also a lot of discussions like this also happen within the university and academia, and sometimes in NGO spaces, but in a more policy sense. And I think there's a disconnect between these two worlds. And often, as someone who's kind of walked in and out of both of these worlds a little bit, I think there needs to be a lot more bridging between these two. Often, when we as kind of civil society people write project proposals, we don't look at what's the latest findings coming in from academia to inform that. And I think that is important because there are people doing that research, doing that thinking, but we don't use that to inform our own work. And the other way around as well, of course, there's so much that academia also can get from the work that the NGOs and the civil society is doing as well. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Such an insight, building bridges between academia and the activists who work at the grassroots level. I think both groups need to learn a lot from each other. Thank you so much, Sunil. Dr. Imran Haider, could you please, share with us your, last comments, recommendations, anything you want to add?
Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, when I was listening to all the speakers and their closing remarks, there are some certain questions in my mind. Like when we use the term challenge and when we fight back, these are also very masculine terms in general. And when I see how change occurred in different parts of the world, we have two different types of examples. One is like because the change has to come. But if the change, if the change will come after facing a lot of loss, that is the obvious way of bringing the change. That the fighting one daughter is facing and experiencing how her mother experienced her whole life, and then if change comes into the life of the daughter, the cost is too high. So we have to break this vicious circle. And I don't know whether it's an appropriate thing to mention or not. I have a very difficult, I'm stuck in a very difficult situation because when I see the most rapid change bringing agents, the corporates are the example. I'm sorry, but the how throughout the world, the different corporates, different capitalist regimes, and multinational companies, they can sell you anything, and no religious leaders, no political beneficiaries, they come in front of them and fight with them, but like us, they talk. Yeah, so we face a lot of different things. So I think we need to be more creative, yeah, keeping in mind the ethics and human right based approach, but somehow some weakness is also on our behalf as well. And that's not weakness, that's a sort of like maybe a missing link between the academia, the research sector, and the practice sector, as well as our uh, advocacy campaigns are project oriented and not very strategic and long term. So these can be reasons, but we also need to sit back and think on our strategies, that whether those also need to be more creative or innovative, because somehow it's a negative term, but you need to deceive the structure. And that deception can not only occur through negative means, that can also occur through equipping yourself more than your counterpart. If you're more educated, if you're more learned, if you have more capacity than a person standing in front of you, someday or the other they will agree to that, because you have more logic, you have more argument, you can benefit their interest as well. Because somehow my last sentence is, somehow when you talk about the change, the beneficiaries think that this change might harm their benefits. So that's my last sentence. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Imran, for pointing out, such critical elements of our work that we need to think through and add to our work. Professor Madhu, could you please, share with us your thoughts before all of us leave? Go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Bilkis. Exactly, I totally agree with Dr. Sepali that there are good examples in terms of textbooks or education policies, and then the government change, and then everything changes. So it is something very disheartening, and it is something like one has to understand as a student of education that the political agenda of education, because states interest in education is very crucial for universalizing educational opportunities, but as well as how to seep in the kind of messages we want for the sake of human rights, or for the sake of alternative compassionate masculinity kind of thing. That is the very crucial thing which we have to think about it. Educational processes beyond the policy and beyond the macro level policies like educational policy and textbooks, the micro level educational processes, pedagogical practices are the answer. From my point of view, we can change the message by changing the teachers' input regarding the nationalism and masculinity. I tried it at a very local level, micro level schools, and I tried it with the NGOs I work with. So it worked, and it also reiterate the message, like bridging the gap between academia and the grassroots level, or the organizations which are working on the grassroots level. So it is something very, whenever you start, it is something like, because the students have accepted this whole naturalized messages of gendered account of nation. So when you start questioning, it is very radical for them. But this is the only way forward, because then you can talk about the alternative way of being man or boy, or there are alternative way of conceiving the nation. So that is difficult, but it's doable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you, everyone. It has been a real pleasure. I'm now handing it over, very informative for me at least, I'm handing it over to Samita for her, last words, also last comments and future plans. Thank you. Over to you, Samita.
Thank you, Bilkis, and thank you so much, all our speakers today. I think definitely all of you enlightened all of us participants in the subject that we, correctly selected for this, roundtable discussion. Because it's like, it's so much still relevant. I mean, Dr. Sepali said that she had looked into some of the textbooks in 80s, and I'm sure that not much had changed. Even when you look at what we have today in our textbooks or any other learning materials that we have. And of course, as Dr. Sepali also correctly said, that since we are in a very digital kind of a era, maybe it could be one of the main ways of kind of developing this public dialogue, or the kind of mass dialogue on how we have to look at these concepts, and how we have to kind of interpret these sometimes the terminologies, or the way the language had been used, and how it had been interpreted and observed by different people. Otherwise, we know that even if you talk to a very small child these days, who are maybe attending to preschool, we know it's already gone into them, what masculinity kind of looks like to them, and what men can do and what women can't do. And in terms of having these patriotic and nationalistic kind of viewpoints, where women stand and where men stand, and what is their role in this whole issue, that even a small child would give you this stereotypical kind of understanding, because it's so visible in almost all the symbols, all the languages, all the songs that we hear day and night. So it's all there. I think and bringing research into this, Professor Madhu, is very enlightening, because we always just try to capture things into our dialogues, looking at what is happening around us, but to have concrete data and analysis of how things have happened and how things have not happened, it's quite quite relevant and quite required in taking or changing or the transformation of this whole concept. And of course the institutions, the media, the young people, the roles those things can play in this whole thing is also very much required, as discussed by our speakers today. So I think taking it all from here, taking all these valuable points from here, we would definitely like to go into a kind of maybe a discussion paper, or maybe a kind of a knowledge product based on this discussion, and maybe to include more viewpoints and more ideas from other people who are working around this issue into that as well. So let's take this as a kind of a beginning of a discussion that South Asia needs to work on, South Asia needs to advocate on, as Professor Imran also mentioned correctly. So let's take it from there. And for the sake of the Ubuntu Symposium, where we kind of trying to bring this the concept of accountability and transformation in terms of masculinity, and engaging men and boys in gender equality. Let's also look into those things as well, and see if this Ubuntu Symposium can contribute from South Asia to this valuable discussion, where we, at least in years to come, that where our children will have a very balanced mindset, very balanced, equal mindset on how women and men are portrayed, and how much women and men can contribute equally, or even in their own ways to this kind of patriotic or nationalistic understanding of South Asia. So I think taking from there, we will, for the Secretariat of Men Engaged Alliance South Asia, we will take up the follow-up work, and of course the materials that we use today, the PowerPoints and all the research links that Professor Madhu will also share with us, we will definitely share with the emails addresses that you have shared now in the chat. And of course, we will kind of share the report in our South Asia Men Engage Facebook group as well, so that it will be reached by a wider community. And let's not stop this discussion here. It's just the beginning. So let's work on it, and let's do something concrete to contribute to this field. Thank you so much. And I also thank Bilkish for moderating today's session and taking up that responsibility. Thank you, Bilkish. And all the speakers today, Professor Madhu from India, representing Men Engage India, and Professor Imran representing Men Engage Pakistan, and Sanil Banyarachi and Dr. Sepali Kotikude representing Men Engage Alliance Sri Lanka. And we are quite privileged to have you with us today. And it was the whole discussion was quite enlightening. So thank you so much, and we will meet again. And for all the participants today, thank you so much for taking your time to be with us. And for the questions that you posted and the ideas that you generated, thank you so much for that. And we appreciate your time. So I think we can wrap up here. Thank you, everyone. And we'll meet you again very soon with another round of South Asia discussions with a very relevant and very interesting topic. So thank you so much.